My knees made themselves known again when I bent down to pull a particularly stubborn weed from under a hydrangea bush. 66 is no joke, especially for a back that remembers 35 years of standing at a blackboard in Michigan City Elementary School. Straightening up, I dusted my hands on an old pair of jeans that Laurel had once tried to throw away, calling them an embarrassment to the family. But what was the point of wearing something decent to crawl around in the garden? The morning sun was already beating down, promising a hot day. I took off the straw hat, a gift from my late husband Harold, and dabbed my forehead with a handkerchief. It had been 5 years since he had passed away, and I still talked to him while working in the garden. Sometimes I thought he answered me, in the wind rustling through the leaves or in the song of a robin on the fence. "See, Harold, your azaleas are finally blooming," I murmured, looking at the bright pink flowers. "It's a shame you didn't live to see how beautiful they've become." The creak of the gate interrupted my one-sided conversation with a ghost. I turned and saw Jimmy, our grandson, tall for a 15-year-old, with a mop of unruly light brown hair and serious gray eyes, just like his grandfather. "Grandma Eunice," he waved at me, holding a backpack in his other hand. "I came to help with the garden, like I promised." "Jimmy!" I couldn't help smiling. "You know you don't have to come every week." "I know," he shrugged, tossing his backpack onto the bench. "But I like it. Besides, you make the best sandwiches in all of Michigan City." I laughed. Typical teenager, always hungry. "Work first, then sandwiches," I said, pointing to the carrot patch that needed weeding. "The tools are in the shed, you know where." Jimmy nodded and headed for the small shed in the corner of the garden. I watched him go, almost a man now, but still with the awkwardness of a teenager who hadn't quite gotten used to his growing body. He was the only one in our family who visited me regularly, just because without any particular reason or need. We worked side by side for almost 2 hours. Jimmy talked about school, his fascination with astronomy, and how his friend Niels had built a homemade telescope. I listened, asking questions at the right moments, enjoying his enthusiasm. These moments with my grandson were a breath of fresh air for me, a reminder that life goes on even after all the losses. "You know, Grandma," Jimmy said, wiping sweat from his forehead, "next school year, Brightwood Specialized School is accepting applications. They have an amazing science program and a real observatory." "That sounds wonderful," I replied, noticing his eyes light up. "Would you like to go there?" "More than anything." He nodded so vigorously that his bangs fell into his eyes. "Mr. Parkinson, my physics teacher, says that with my grades I have a chance of getting in, but—" He hesitated, suddenly finding something interesting in his shoes. "Only what?" "It's a private school, expensive," he shrugged, still not looking at me. "Mom and Dad say it's impossible right now." I nodded, not knowing what to say. The thought of the savings I had been putting aside for years flashed through my mind. Harold always said, "Eunice, that money is for a rainy day or something really important." Wasn't Jimmy's education important? We finished work around noon, and as promised, I made roast beef sandwiches with homemade pickles, Jimmy's favorite treat. We were sitting on the porch enjoying our well-deserved rest when the sound of a car pulling up caught our attention. "Oh, it's my parents," Jimmy said, and I thought I detected a hint of disappointment in his voice. "They said they'd pick me up after lunch." A shiny new sedan, too expensive for a modest housing inspector's salary, pulled up outside my house. Toby and Aaron got out, both dressed as if they had just stepped out of a fashion magazine, not for a casual Saturday visit to their mother in the suburbs. "Mom!" Toby broke into a smile that seemed too wide to me. "It's so good to see you." I let him hug me, feeling the tension in his shoulders. Aaron hugged me too, leaving a trail of expensive perfume in the air. "Eunice, you look wonderful," she said with that particular intonation that always made me feel like I looked terrible. "Oh, and your garden. It's just magnificent this year." I glanced at Jimmy, who rolled his eyes so that only I could see. Erin had never shown the slightest interest in my garden in all the years she had been married to Toby. "Thank you," I replied dryly. "Would you like some tea? Or maybe coffee?" "Coffee would be great, Mom," said Toby, settling down on the porch with an expression that made me feel like I was doing him a favor by letting him be there. While I was making coffee in the kitchen, I could hear them talking on the porch, too loudly and too cheerfully, like actors in a bad play. When I returned with the tray, Aaron was examining my flower beds with exaggerated admiration. You must have a gardener, Eunice. I'll never believe you do all this yourself at your age. There's no gardener, Jimmy replied before I could open my mouth. Grandma and I do everything ourselves. I help her every week. Erin looked as if she had swallowed a lemon. Toby quickly changed the subject. How are you, Mom? Everything okay with your health? The house? Everything's fine, I replied, pouring coffee. How are you guys? Haven't seen you in a while. Oh, you know how it is. Toby waved his hand. Work, home, never-ending bills. Erin wanted to renovate the kitchen, but we had to put it off. We're a little tight on money right now. I noticed Erin glance at him, a mixture of irritation and warning. But we're getting by, she added quickly. The main thing is Jimmy's future. He's such a smart boy. Jimmy shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. Speaking of Jimmy's future, Toby continued, taking a sip of coffee, we wanted to talk to you about something important, Mom. Here it was, the real reason for their visit. I braced myself. Has Jimmy told you about Brightwood School? Toby asked, getting to the point. He mentioned it today, I nodded. It's an amazing opportunity for him, Mom. Toby leaned forward, entering the persuasive mode I knew so well. The best science program in the state, connections to universities, a chance to get a scholarship in the future. Jimmy could start there next semester. His teachers wrote glowing recommendations. That's right, Mrs. Lattimore. Erin chimed in, using the formal address she only used when she wanted something from me. We always knew Jimmy was special, but this school, it's his chance to really fulfill his potential. I looked at Jimmy. He sat with his eyes down, but I could see the hope on his face. What's the problem? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. The thing is, Mom, Toby paused as if searching for the right words, the school requires a deposit, $7,000. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of money right now. We tried to take out a loan, Erin added with a dramatic sigh, but the bank turned us down. After Toby took the new job, our credit rating took a bit of a hit. I stood there silently, looking at them. The silence hung in the air, broken only by the chirping of birds in the garden. Mom, Toby finally said, we know you have savings from selling Dad's truck and insurance. It's very important for Jimmy's future. We wouldn't ask if we weren't in a desperate situation. And when do you need the money? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. By the end of next week, Toby replied. Otherwise, the place will go to another child on the waiting list. I looked at Jimmy. His eyes were full of hope, but there was something else in them too. Embarrassment, maybe even shame. Grandma, he said quietly, you don't have to do this. I can stay at my school. It's a good school too. Jimmy, Erin scolded him. Don't be silly, this is your chance. I sighed. I was looking at three pairs of eyes. Erin's eager eyes, Toby's insistent eyes, and Jimmy's sincere eyes. It was hard to say no to my grandson, especially knowing how much he loved science. But something about Toby and Erin's behavior made me uneasy. The sudden request, the urgent visit, the exaggerated compliments. I need to think about it, I finally said. It's a lot of money, and I have to weigh everything carefully. Of course, Mom, Toby said, but I saw the disappointment on his face. We understand. It's just that time is really short. I'll give you an answer in a couple of days, I added, standing up to show that the conversation was over. As they left, Jimmy lingered for a second and whispered to me, I'm sorry, Grandma. I didn't know they were going to ask you for money. It was their idea, not mine. I hugged him, feeling how much he had grown over the past year. I know, sweetie. Don't worry about it. Watching them leave, I returned to the garden and sat down on a bench next to the hydrangeas. The sun was already beginning to set, painting the sky orange. I closed my eyes, trying to sort out my feelings. $7,000. It was a lot of money for a pensioner, but I had savings. Harold always said we should save for emergencies, but wasn't my grandson's education worth it? On the other hand, Toby and Erin's behavior seemed strange to me. Their sudden appearance after months of rare phone calls, those insincere compliments. "What would you do, Harold?" I whispered, looking at the setting sun. But the only answer I got was a light evening breeze rustling through the leaves. That night I lay awake for a long time, thinking about my son's request. Something about the whole situation made me uneasy, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the fact that they had shown up unannounced, or how unnaturally Aaron admired my garden, or the tension I felt between Toby and Jimmy. In the morning, I decided I needed time to think things over. I called Toby and told him I'd give him an answer in 3 days. He sounded impatient but agreed to wait. After all, he didn't have a choice. Over the next few days, I went about my usual business, gardening, grocery shopping, meeting friends from my book club. But I couldn't stop thinking about Toby's request. $7,000 for Jimmy's education would be a good investment. But something about the situation continued to bother me. On Wednesday, I decided to drive to the mall in the next town to buy a new tablecloth for the kitchen table. I rarely went to big stores, preferring the small shops in our town, but I wanted to get out and take my mind off my son's request. The Oak Ridge Mall was a huge glass structure filled with light and noise. I wandered between the stores looking at the window displays when I noticed a group of teenagers sitting by the fountain in the central hall. Among them, I recognized Niels, Jimmy's friend, whom I had seen at our house several times. "Mrs. Lattimore," he exclaimed when he saw me. "Hello. Hello, Niels," I smiled. "How are you?" "Fine, thank you," he said, introducing me to his friends whose names I immediately forgot. "Are you here shopping?" "Yes, I'm looking for a new tablecloth," I nodded. "Isn't Jimmy with you?" "He said you had plans today." Niels and the other teenagers exchanged glances. "He was supposed to come, but he wrote that he was going shopping with his parents again," Niels said with slight irritation. "That's the third time this month. We wanted to go to the new science museum." "I see," I said, feeling a little uneasy. "Well, tell him hi if you see him." After saying goodbye to the boys, I headed for the home textiles department, but Neil's words kept running through my mind. Going shopping with his parents again. It sounded strange. Jimmy had never shown much interest in shopping, preferring to spend time with his friends or reading books. I had chosen a tablecloth with a pattern of wildflowers and was about to head to the checkout when my attention was caught by the Louis Vuitton sign on the upper floor. Something compelled me to take the escalator and walk past the store, even though I had never bought anything there or even stepped inside. I was almost level with the window when I froze in my tracks. Through the glass wall of the store, I saw Toby and Aaron standing at the counter. Aaron was holding a bag of some kind, examining it with obvious admiration. Toby stood next to her, taking his credit card out of his wallet. A little to the side, looking openly bored, sat Jimmy, buried in his phone. I stepped back behind a pillar, feeling my heart beating in my throat. Toby, who just a few days ago had told me about financial difficulties and not being able to pay for his son's school, was now buying his wife a bag in one of the most expensive stores in town. I stood behind the column, clutching a bag with a new tablecloth, unable to take my eyes off the scene in the Louis Vuitton store. My son Toby and his wife Erin looked as if they completely owned the place. Confident, relaxed, clearly in their element. Erin held a brown bag with the brand's signature pattern in her hands, turning it this way and that, admiring it. Toby nodded knowingly, as if he appraised designer accessories worth several months' salary every day. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor. What I was seeing didn't match the story Toby had told me just 3 days ago about his financial difficulties. And for all the previous years, he had constantly complained about not having enough money, high bills, and the high cost of living. And now here he was, buying a bag in a store that most people in our town wouldn't even dare to enter. It took me a few seconds to get over the initial shock. I stepped further back behind the column, afraid they might notice me. Part of me wanted to rush into the store and demand an explanation, but the other, more rational part of me knew that would be a mistake. I needed to understand what was going on, and I admit I was ashamed. Ashamed that my own son thought it was okay to lie to me. I peeked out from behind the pillar. Jimmy was still sitting off to the side with that detached expression that teenagers have when they're forced to accompany their parents to places they find boring. He would periodically look up from his phone, glance around, and then dive back into his digital world. He didn't look at all like the enthusiastic boy who had told me about Brightwood and the opportunities it offered. I remembered Niels's words about Jimmy again, going shopping with his parents instead of meeting his friends. Was this a regular activity? And more importantly, why take a child with you who is clearly not interested? While I was thinking about this, the saleswoman returned to Aaron with a small booklet, probably a certificate of authenticity or a warranty card. Aaron signed the document as if it were not a purchase but at least a diplomatic treaty. Toby handed her credit card, and the saleswoman took it to the cash register. I was overcome by a strange feeling, a mixture of anger, disappointment, and some kind of childish resentment. It was as if I were a little girl again, discovering that a friend I trusted had told everyone my secret. You'd think that at my age such emotions would have dulled, but no, betrayal was still betrayal, even when you were 66 and the betrayer was 42. The saleswoman returned with the credit card and the receipt. Toby signed carelessly as if the amount were insignificant. This was the same Toby who, a few days ago, with a pained expression on his face, had told me about his financial difficulties and how they had to save even on kitchen repairs. The same Toby who had asked me for $7,000 for his son's school, claiming they didn't have that kind of money. Aaron carefully took the bag of groceries from the saleswoman, smiled radiantly at her, and turned toward the exit. Toby put his arm around her shoulder in a possessive gesture, and they headed for the store exit. Jimmy, noticing that his parents were finally done, got up with obvious relief and trailed after them, his eyes glued to his phone. I quickly stepped back behind the column, praying that they would go in the opposite direction from me. Fortunately, that's what happened. They turned left, and I was to the right of the store exit. Without knowing why, I decided to follow them. Perhaps I needed more proof of what I had just seen. Or maybe I was hoping to hear something that would explain the glaring contradiction between their words and actions. I kept my distance, hiding behind other shoppers. At 66 years old, I never thought I'd be stalking my own son in a shopping mall like some private detective from a cheap novel. But here I was, sneaking between the displays and trying to remain unnoticed. Toby and Aaron walked hand in hand, stopping occasionally at the windows of other expensive stores. Jimmy trailed behind, clearly wishing he was anywhere but there. I remembered how he had told me about the science museum that had recently opened in town, how his eyes had lit up when he talked about the interactive exhibits and the real meteorite in the lobby. Instead, he was forced to accompany his parents on their shopping trip. They stopped at the fountain in the center of the mall, the same one where I had met Niels and his friends. Erin sat down on the edge, opened her new bag, and searched for something inside. Toby stood nearby, checking messages on his phone. Jimmy sat down on a bench nearby, still engrossed in his phone. I slowed my pace, pretending to look at a jewelry store window. From where I stood, I could hear their conversation, especially when they raised their voices, which Erin did quite often. "Did you see the look on that saleswoman's face?" Erin said, taking a mirror out of her bag and checking her makeup. "She clearly didn't expect us to actually buy that model." Toby muttered, still staring at his phone. "I mean," Erin continued, "that bag is from the new collection, and they just put it on sale. Melissa from my clinic is going to die of envy when she sees it. She's always bragging about her new car, but now I'll show her what real class is." Toby finally looked up from his phone and smiled at her. "You deserve the best, honey." "I know," she replied simply, closing the mirror. "By the way, did you call your mother about the money?" At the mention of me, I tensed up, listening even more closely to the conversation. "Yes, yesterday," Toby nodded. "She said she needed more time to think about it. I swear, sometimes she's just unbearable with her caution. She has the money. What's there to think about?" "Maybe you should have asked for more?" Erin twirled a strand of hair thoughtfully. "Since you have to persuade her anyway." "I don't think so," Toby shook his head. 7,000 is enough to make her hesitate, but not so much that she'd refuse outright. It's the perfect balance." "Well, I hope she doesn't drag it out too long," Erin sighed, lovingly stroking her new bag. "We have to pay the car loan by the end of the month." I felt the blood drain from my face. So the money for Jimmy's school wasn't for school at all. They were going to use it to pay off the loan on the shiny new silver car they'd driven up in. Or maybe to cover the debt on the handbag Aaron was now stroking so lovingly. Don't worry, Toby reassured her. Mom never says no when it comes to Jimmy. He's her weak spot. That's why we brought him with us last time. She looks into his eyes and melts like butter in the sun. Aaron smiled. Yeah, smart move. Although he's been such a bore lately. All he talks about is school and his science stuff. Well, in this case, that works to our advantage, Toby shrugged. Let Mom think he really wants to go there. Doesn't he? Aaron asked, slightly surprised. I have no idea, Toby admitted honestly. Maybe he does. But what do we care? As long as Mom gives us the money. I stood there as if struck by lightning, feeling my heart pound so hard that it seemed everyone around me could hear it. They were using Jimmy's dream of a good school as bait to get money from me for their debts. They were manipulating not only me, but their own son. Hey, Jimmy, Toby called out, noticing that his son was sitting off to the side. Are you asleep over there? We're going to a restaurant. I'm hungry. Jimmy reluctantly got up and walked over to his parents. Dad, can I go to Niels's? He's here at the museum with the guys. No, Toby snapped. We're spending the day as a family. And anyway, you should be grateful that we're taking you to places like this instead of cheap sales like your friend's parents. Jimmy lowered his head, but I noticed him roll his eyes when Toby turned away. My heart ached for my grandson. He was just a pawn in his parents' game. They headed for the exit of the mall, and I stood there, frozen in front of the display window, unable to move. My hands were shaking, and thoughts were racing through my head. All this time, Toby had been using me as an ATM. He would come to me asking for money, always presenting it as an emergency, always emphasizing that it was the last time that they were just going through a rough patch. And I, stupid old woman that I was, believed him every time. How many times had I bailed him out? $2,000 for roof repairs after a storm, $3,000 for Erin's treatment when she supposedly had back problems, $1,500 for Toby's professional development courses, which were supposed to help him get ahead at work. And every time I gave him money, I believed I was helping my son, that I was doing the right thing. Harold, if he were alive, would have disapproved. He always said Toby needed to learn to stand on his own 2 feet. Eunice, you spoil him too much, he said. He'll never grow up if you keep solving all his problems for him. But I didn't listen. I thought I was just helping my son through a difficult time, that it was temporary, that he would soon get back on his feet and no longer need my help. How wrong I was. And now they were using Jimmy, my grandson, as a means of pressure. They knew how much I loved him, how proud I was of his intelligence and hard work. They were using his dreams and ambitions to manipulate me. I slowly walked out of the mall, feeling empty and betrayed. The spring sun, still shining brightly in the sky, seemed dull and cold to me. The world around me seemed to have lost its color. When I reached my old car, I got behind the wheel but didn't rush to start the engine. I needed time to collect my thoughts and decide what to do next. Of course, I wasn't going to give them the $7,000. That was crystal clear. But what would I tell Jimmy? How could I explain that I couldn't help him get into the school of his dreams because of his parents' lies? And what would I tell Toby? Part of me wanted to call him right away and tell him exactly what I thought of his behavior, but another, more rational part of me understood that it wouldn't change anything. Toby would just come up with a new lie, a new explanation, and it would all start over again. I started the car and slowly pulled out of the parking lot. On the way home, I thought about how my relationship with my son had changed over the years. When he was little, we were so close. He told me everything, his dreams, his fears, his joys, and his sorrows. When he went to college, we still talked often, and I felt like our bond was unbreakable. But then he met Erin. At first, I was happy for him. She seemed so lively, energetic, and determined. I thought she would be a good influence on him, help him become more ambitious and find his place in life. Now I realized I was wrong. Erin didn't make Toby better. She just changed the direction of his weaknesses. If he had been a little lazy and indecisive before, now he had become manipulative, willing to use even his own mother to satisfy his and her desires. By the time I got home, it was already getting dark. I mechanically made myself dinner, a simple salad and a piece of yesterday's casserole, but I couldn't swallow a bite. My appetite was completely gone. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, a habit I had picked up after Harold's death. He had never approved of alcohol. saying it was a waste of money and health. But now, I felt I deserved this little comfort. Sitting in my favorite chair by the window overlooking the garden, I watched the last rays of sunlight play on the leaves of the trees. The garden was my refuge, a place where I always found peace and comfort. But today, even it couldn't calm the storm in my soul. I thought about how Aaron and Toby had discussed me by the fountain. "She has money. What's there to think about?" my son had said, as if he were talking about a bank account rather than his mother. "Maybe she should have asked for more," Aaron suggested, as if I were not a person with feelings and needs, but simply a source of funding for their luxurious lifestyle. And the worst part was that they were using Jimmy, my kind, intelligent, hardworking grandson who truly deserved a better school, a better education, a better future. They were using his dreams as a tool to manipulate me, not caring what would happen when the truth came out. The phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. Toby. He was probably calling to see if I had made a decision about the money. I let the phone ring without answering. I wasn't ready to talk to him right now. Wasn't sure I could hold back and not say everything that was boiling inside me. After the fifth ring, the phone finally went silent. A minute later, a text message arrived. "Mom, why aren't you answering? Is everything okay? Call me back when you can." I put my phone down. I needed time to think about the situation, to decide what to do. I couldn't just call him and tell him I'd seen them at the mall, that I'd heard their conversation. That would only provoke more lies, more excuses. No, I needed a different approach. I needed to gather more information, to understand how deep this deception went. And I needed to talk to Jimmy, not to get anything out of him, but to understand how I could help him without encouraging his parents' lies. I finished my wine and went to bed, knowing that sleep would not come easily. Fragments of the conversation I had overheard were running through my head, images of Toby and Aaron in the expensive store, Jimmy's sad face, and the bitter realization that my own son saw me as nothing more than a convenient source of money. In the morning, I woke up with a heavy head and the feeling that the whole situation had been just a bad dream. But reality quickly set in when I saw 2 missed calls from Toby and a message. "Mom, we need to talk about Jimmy's school. It's really important." I put my phone down without answering. I needed to talk to someone I could trust, someone who could give me advice or at least listen. And I knew who to turn to. Laurel, my daughter, had always been more straightforward and honest than Toby. We didn't always get along because of her directness. Sometimes she said things that were hard to hear. But right now I needed that kind of honesty. I quickly got ready and decided to visit her without warning. It wasn't really my style. I usually called ahead, but right now, I felt like I couldn't wait. As I left the house, I glanced at my phone one last time. 3 missed calls from Toby. Well, he'd have to wait. Right now, I needed to figure out what was going on, and Laurel was the person who could help me see the situation more clearly. On the way to my daughter's house, I thought about what I would say to her. How could I explain that I had overheard my own son's conversation at the mall? How could I admit that I had been so naive all these years, allowing Toby to manipulate me? But I knew Laurel wouldn't judge me. For all her bluntness, she was always fair. And most importantly, she loved her nephew Jimmy and cared about his well-being as much as I did. As I pulled up to my daughter's house, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time since the incident at the mall, I felt that I wasn't alone, that there was someone who could help me untangle this web of lies and manipulation. I parked outside her house, a modest but well-kept one-story building with a small garden in front of the entrance. Laurel had always lived within her means, never asked me for money, and, as far as I knew, had no debts. In this, she was the complete opposite of her brother. As I got out of the car, I noticed that my hands were no longer shaking. Determination replaced shock and confusion. I knew I was in for a difficult conversation, possibly more than one. But I couldn't let Toby and Aaron use me anymore, and certainly not Jimmy. I walked up to the porch and rang the doorbell, ready to finally hear the truth, no matter how bitter it might be. The door opened, and Laurel appeared on the threshold. My daughter so much like me when I was young, only with more angular features and a straighter gaze. She was dressed in jeans and a simple t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Unlike Erin, Laurel never spent much time on her appearance. Mom? The surprise on her face quickly gave way to concern. Is something wrong? I'm sorry I didn't call, I said, feeling awkward. Can I come in? I need to talk to you. Laurel stepped aside silently, letting me into the house. It was one of the traits I had always appreciated in my daughter. She didn't ask unnecessary questions when she saw that someone needed help. Laurel's house was modest but cozy. Simple, functional furniture, minimal decor, but everything was clean and tidy. On the walls were a few framed photographs. Her husband David, who was currently away on business, their wedding photo, an old photo of our family when the children were young, and several pictures of Jimmy at different ages. Laurel didn't have children of her own, but she had always been very close to her nephew. Tea? Coffee? Laurel asked, leading me into the kitchen. Tea, please, I replied, sinking into a chair at the kitchen table. Laurel silently put the kettle on and took out some cups. I knew this was her way of giving people time to collect their thoughts before starting a conversation. She didn't rush or pressure, she just created a space where you could talk openly. When the tea was ready and we were sitting across from each other with steaming cups, Laurel finally asked, "So what brought you to me so early? Is it about Toby?" I flinched involuntarily. Laurel had always been perceptive. Yes, I took a deep breath. I saw him and Erin at the Oak Ridge Mall yesterday. They were buying a Louis Vuitton bag, a very expensive bag. Lorelei didn't look surprised. She took a sip of her tea and asked calmly, "And that shocked you because—" "Because 3 days ago they came to me and asked for $7,000 for Jimmy's school." The words came out with unexpected passion. Toby said they were having financial difficulties, that they couldn't even afford to repair their kitchen, and now I see them buying designer stuff. Laurel shook her head, not in surprise, but rather in confirmation of a long-known fact. And that's not all, I continued, feeling a wave of bitterness rising. I overheard their conversation. They were going to use the money to pay off their car loan. They used Jimmy's dream of going to school as bait, knowing I wouldn't say no to my grandson. Laurel sighed and put her cup down. Mom, I'm sorry, but I have to ask. Are you really surprised? Her question caught me off guard. What do you mean? Toby has always been like this, Laurel shrugged. He always found a way to get what he wanted, especially from you. Remember how he used to call all the time in college asking for more money? Or how he lost his first apartment deposit and you had to put down a second one? Or the story about his business idea that failed but somehow cost you $3,000? I felt my cheeks flush. Yes, I remembered all those incidents, and many others, but I always found excuses for my son. I just wanted to help him, I said quietly. Every time it seemed like it was really important, like it was the last time. Mom, Laurel leaned forward, her voice softening but her gaze remaining direct. Toby is using you. Systematically, for years, and he's not going to stop as long as you let him. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. Not because they weren't true, but because somewhere deep down I had always known it, but refused to admit it. He's your brother, I said weakly. How can you talk about him like that? That's exactly why I'm saying it, Laurel replied. I love him, but I'm not blind to his flaws, and I don't want him to keep using you. I looked down at my hands, remembering all the times Toby had come to me with requests. Always the same story. Temporary difficulties, unexpected expenses. This was the last time he would definitely pay me back. And I always believed him. Or pretended to believe him. Did you know about this? I asked Laurel. That they weren't really going to use the money for Jimmy's school? Laurel paused, as if weighing whether to say anything. Then she sighed. Toby called me last week. He asked to borrow $2,000 for Jimmy's first school payment. He said you'd give him the rest. And you gave him the money? I couldn't hide my surprise. No. Laurel shook her head. I told him I couldn't, partly because I really can't. David and I are saving for a new roof. But the main reason is that I know that money will never go to Jimmy's school. How do you know? Because this isn't the first time Toby has asked for money for Jimmy. Laurel stood up and walked over to the sideboard. She took out a folder and returned to the table. Here, look. She opened the folder and I saw several bank checks and receipts. They were all from Toby to Laurel with promises to pay her back. 2 years ago, he asked me for money for Jimmy's summer science camp, Laurel said, showing me one of the documents. $4,000. I gave it to him because Jimmy is my nephew and I wanted him to have that experience. You know where the money went? To Aaron's spa vacation? Jimmy didn't go to any camp. I felt nauseous. And here's another one, Laurel continued, showing another receipt. Last summer, $2,500 for a physics tutor for Jimmy. Toby swore it would help him get into a specialized school. I gave him the money again, and again, it wasn't spent on Jimmy. This time, Toby bought himself a new laptop and some gadgets. How do you know? I asked, even though I already believed her. Jimmy told me himself, Laurel replied. He didn't know I had given the money specifically for a tutor. He just mentioned that he would like to have extra lessons, but his parents said it was too expensive. I closed my eyes, feeling anger rising inside me, not just at Toby and Aaron, but at myself. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let this go on for years? You never told me about this, I said to Laurel. I tried, she replied with a hint of bitterness. Remember after the camp? I came to see you and told you I was worried about Toby, about his attitude toward money, but you didn't want to listen. You said he was just going through a difficult period, that everyone has problems. I vaguely remembered that conversation and how I defended Toby, not wanting to see the truth. I didn't want to believe my son could do something like that, I admitted. I know, Mom. Laurel covered my hand with hers. No one wants to believe the worst about their children, but sometimes we have to see the truth, especially when it affects others. In this case, it affects Jimmy. At the mention of my grandson, I felt a pang of guilt again. Does Jimmy know about how his parents are using his dreams? Laurel paused, then replied, I think he's starting to understand. He's a smart boy, Mom, and he sees more than his parents think he does. We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Laurel asked, What are you going to do? I don't know, I replied honestly. Of course, I'm not going to give them the $7,000, but I'm worried about Jimmy. He really wants to go to that school. I had seen his eyes light up when he talked about it. Maybe there's a way to help him directly, Laurel suggested, without involving Toby and Aaron. The thought had already crossed my mind, but I wasn't sure how to go about it. Toby would never let me interfere like that. I need to talk to Jimmy, I said. Find out what he really wants and how I can help. Laurel nodded. That's a good idea. Just be careful. Don't put him in a position where he has to choose between you and his parents. I understood her concern. Jimmy was just a teenager, and he shouldn't be caught up in adult conflicts. But I also knew I couldn't let Toby and Aaron continue to use him as a pawn in their financial games. Thanks, Laurel, I said, standing up, for your honesty, and for always looking out for Jimmy. She walked me to the door and we hugged, tighter than usual. I felt like that conversation had changed something between us, brought us closer together. Maybe it was because, for the first time in a long time, I had allowed myself to see the truth that Lorelai had been trying to show me for years. When I got home, I found several more missed calls from Toby and a message. Mom, why aren't you answering? We need to talk about Jimmy's school. Time is running out. I didn't answer. I needed to talk to Jimmy first, to understand his perspective before confronting Toby. Fortunately, I didn't have to wait long. At around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the doorbell rang, and there stood Jimmy with his backpack slung over his shoulder. Hi, Grandma, he said with that mixture of shyness and confidence so characteristic of teenagers. I came to help you with your computer, like I promised. I had completely forgotten that I had complained to him last week about problems with my email. Typical Jimmy, remembering and coming to help without being reminded. Come in, dear. I stepped aside to let him in. How's school? Fine, he shrugged as he walked inside. Mr. Parkinson gave me some extra physics homework. He said it would help me prepare for the entrance exams at Brightwood. My heart sank at the mention of school. Jimmy really wanted to go there. It wasn't something Toby and Aaron had made up. They were just using their son's genuine desire for their own ends. Would you like a snack before we get on the computer? I asked, leading him into the kitchen. I have some cookies you like. With chocolate chips? His eyes lit up. Of course, I smiled, taking out the box of cookies I kept especially for his visits. Jimmy sat down at the kitchen table and took the cookies. I put a glass of milk in front of him and sat down across from him, watching him eat. At moments like this, he still seemed like a little boy, not the young man he was becoming. Tell me more about that school, Brightwood, I asked casually. Why do you want to go there so much? Jimmy perked up, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. It's the best science school in the state, Grandma. They have a real observatory on the roof, not just a telescope, but a whole observatory, and labs with equipment like in real research centers. And the teachers, many of them used to work at NASA or at major universities. He spoke with such enthusiasm that there was no doubt about his sincere desire to study there. And you think you can get in? I asked. Mr. Parkinson says I have a good chance. Jimmy nodded. My grades are high enough and he wrote me a recommendation, but… He faltered and his enthusiasm waned somewhat. But what? It's expensive, he sighed. Mom and Dad say they don't have the money. Dad said my only chance is if you help me. I watched his expression closely, trying to figure out if he knew about my parents' scheme. And what do you think about that? About me helping? Jimmy paused, searching for the right words. I don't want you to feel obligated, Grandma. It's a lot of money. Dad said you could give it to us because you love me, but… He hesitated, clearly embarrassed. But I don't want you to give money just because of me, especially if it's too much for you. I was touched by his concern. At 15, he was more attentive to my financial situation than his father had been in his entire 42 years. Does your father often talk to you about my money? I asked as neutrally as possible. Jimmy shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. Sometimes, he admitted, especially lately when we started talking about Brightwood. He said you have savings and that you always said they were for something important, and that my education is important. I nodded, feeling my irritation with Toby grow. He was using my own words to manipulate his son into feeling that I owed him the money. What about that science camp you've been dreaming about for 2 years? I asked, remembering my conversation with Laurel. You never went? Jimmy shook his head. No, Dad said it was too expensive and we couldn't afford it. But I stopped, realizing I had almost given myself away. I thought you really wanted to go. I did, Jimmy admitted, a hint of sadness in his voice. There was an astrophysics program that sounded amazing, but it's okay. I found a lot of information online and studied on my own. My heart sank. Toby and Aaron had deprived their son of an opportunity he deserved, using the money for their own needs, and now history could repeat itself. What if I said I wanted to help you with Brightwood, but directly? I asked cautiously. For example, I could pay for the school myself without giving the money to your parents. Jimmy looked at me with surprise, which quickly turned to understanding. Something flashed in his eyes. Realization, suspicion, and he looked down at his hands. I don't know what to say, Grandma, he said quietly. Dad probably won't be happy. He said it was a family matter and that they would sort things out with the school themselves if you gave them the money. Sort things out? I asked. What did he mean? Jimmy fidgeted even more. Well, he said we had to take care of some debts first and then think about school, that there was no point in paying for Brightwood if we had problems with the car loan or something like that. I didn't really understand, to be honest. There it was. Toby wasn't even trying to hide from his son that he was going to use the money for something else. He just made it sound like one thing depended on the other. Jimmy, I said, choosing my words carefully, do you really want to go to Brightwood? Is this your dream, or is it what your parents want for you? Of course it is, he exclaimed with genuine enthusiasm. I've dreamed about that school ever since Mr. Parkinson first told me about it. Some of the scientists I admire went there, and their astronomy and physics programs are incredible. I could see that his interest was genuine. It wasn't something Toby and Aaron had come up with as an excuse to get money. They were simply using their son's real dream. You know what? I said, making up my mind. Let's deal with my computer first, and then I'll think about how best to help you with this school, okay? Okay, Grandma. Jimmy nodded with relief, glad to change the subject. Show me what's wrong with your email. We spent the next hour at my old computer. Jimmy patiently explained how the various email functions worked, how to attach files, and how to sort messages. I listened attentively, but part of my mind continued to ponder the situation with Toby and Brightwood School. When Jimmy was about to leave, I asked him, "Do your parents know you're here?" "Yes, I told them I was coming to help you with the computer." He nodded. "They said it's good that I'm spending time with you. Dad even said it might help with, well, the school decision." I felt anger boiling up inside me again. Toby was even using his son's genuine affection for me as a tool to get money. "Jimmy, I want you to know something," I said, putting my hand on his shoulder. "No matter what happens between me and your parents, I will always love you and support you. Always. Do you understand?" He nodded, slightly embarrassed by the intensity of my words. "Of course, Grandma, I love you too." I hugged him goodbye, feeling my resolve grow. I would not let Toby and Aaron manipulate me or use Jimmy. I would find a way to help my grandson, but on my terms, not theirs. After Jimmy left, I sat down at the kitchen table, thinking about everything I had learned over the past 2 days. My son had systematically deceived me, using my love for him and his son. He had spent the money I had given him for Jimmy's benefit on his own whims and errands. And now he was trying to do the same thing again. But this time, I wouldn't let him get away with it. For the first time in years, I saw the situation clearly, without the rose-colored glasses of maternal love. And I knew I had to act, not just for myself, but for Jimmy. The phone rang again, Toby, for the 6th or 7th time that day. This time, I decided to answer. But first, I needed to think about what I would say to him, how I would explain my refusal without revealing what I knew about his deception. This required caution and a well-thought-out approach. I declined the call, deciding it would be better to meet him in person. That way, I could see his reaction and understand how deep his willingness to lie went, and maybe find a way to help Jimmy without letting his parents abuse my trust. The decision was made. Tomorrow, I would go to Toby's house and talk to him and Aaron. It wouldn't be an easy conversation, but it was long overdue. For too long, I had turned a blind eye to the truth, allowing my son to use me. It was time to put an end to it. I woke up early before dawn. My sleep had been restless and fitful. All the conversations and revelations of the last few days had kept me awake. After drinking a cup of strong tea, I sat by the window and watched the first rays of sunlight slowly paint the sky a soft pink. Harold loved early mornings. "That's when your mind works best," he used to say. And right now, I needed clarity of thought. I had already formulated a plan yesterday, but I wanted to think it through one more time. Today, I would go to Toby's house unannounced. Direct confrontation was not my style. I had always preferred to avoid conflict, but sometimes you have to step outside your comfort zone to protect yourself and those you love. At 9 o'clock in the morning, I was ready. I put on my best everyday dress, not to impress Toby or Aaron, but to feel more confident. Harold always said, "Dress like you're going to an important meeting, and you'll feel like you're in control." How I missed him at times like this. It took about 20 minutes to drive to Toby's house. They lived in a new neighborhood in Michigan City, in a house that Toby described as modest, but which actually looked quite pretentious for the family of a housing inspector and a dental clinic administrator. The brick facade, large windows, and well-manicured lawn all screamed of a desire to impress neighbors and casual passers-by. I parked my old car on the sidewalk and sat there for a few minutes, gathering my courage. Part of me still hoped that there was some reasonable explanation for all this, that I was wrong about Toby, that my son couldn't have been deceiving his own mother so coldly for so long. Finally, I got out of the car and walked resolutely toward the front door. I rang the doorbell and heard it ring melodiously inside the house. A few seconds later, the door opened and Erin appeared on the threshold, dressed in sweatpants and a silk blouse, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. Surprise flashed across her face, quickly replaced by an attempt to look happy. "Eunice, what a surprise!" she exclaimed with that particular intonation that always seemed fake to me. "We weren't expecting you." "I was driving by and thought I'd stop in," I said, trying to sound casual. I hope I'm not in the way. Of course not. Come on in. Aaron stepped aside, letting me into the house. Toby's in the backyard, fixing something in the shed. Jimmy's still asleep. Teenagers, they can sleep until noon on weekends. I entered the hallway, noticing new details in the interior: an expensive vase on the console table, a painting in a heavy frame that hadn't been there before. And, of course, that very same Louis Vuitton bag, casually tossed on the table by the mirror as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world, not a luxury item worth at least several $1,000s. Aaron caught my eye and proudly stroked the bag. Do you like it? It's a gift from Toby for our anniversary. He's so thoughtful. It's very pretty, I said neutrally. It must have been expensive. A slight shadow crossed Erin's face, but she quickly regained her smile. Well, sometimes you have to treat yourself, right? Life's too short to deny yourself everything, especially when someone else is paying for it, I said quietly, but loud enough for her to hear. Sorry, what? Erin blinked, clearly unsure if she had heard me correctly. Nothing, I smiled. Is Toby home? I need to talk to both of you. Yes, of course. Erin looked slightly puzzled. I'll get him. Go into the kitchen. I'll make some coffee. I walked into the spacious kitchen, noting the new stainless steel appliances, granite countertops, and designer chairs. For people who supposedly couldn't afford renovations, their kitchen looked impressively modern. A few minutes later, Toby walked into the kitchen, wiping his hands on a rag. He was wearing old jeans and a t-shirt, clothes he only wore for housework to create the image of a hard-working homeowner. Mom! He feigned surprise and delight, leaning down to kiss me on the cheek. What a nice surprise! Why didn't you tell us you were coming? We could have cleaned up. Sometimes spontaneous visits are best, I replied, watching his reaction closely. They let you see how people really live. Toby frowned slightly but quickly regained his smile. Well, it's a little messy, but you know how it is with a teenager in the house. Aaron set the coffee cups on the table and sat down across from me. So, what brings you here, Uni? Have you made a decision about Jimmy's school? Straight to the point. No pleasantries, no genuine interest in my life. Just the money they were hoping to get. Yes, I've made a decision, I said calmly. But first, I'd like to ask you a few questions. Toby and Aaron exchanged quick glances. I could almost physically feel the tension building in the air. Sure, Mom, Toby said, sitting down next to Aaron. What do you want to know? I took a sip of coffee, gathering my thoughts. I could have started from afar, gradually leading them to the point, but I decided not to waste time playing games. Are you really going to use that $7,000 for Jimmy's school? I asked bluntly. Toby looked genuinely offended. Of course, Mom. What else would it be for? We told you how important it is for Jimmy, for his future. Then why did you say we had to take care of the car payments first and worry about school later? I asked, remembering Jimmy's words. Toby visibly tensed up. I don't know what you're talking about. Jimmy told me, I interrupted. He said you told him there was no point in paying for Brightwood if you were having trouble with the car loan. Aaron shot Toby an angry look, clearly unhappy that he had discussed their financial plans with their son. Mom, you've got it all wrong. Toby tried to remain calm, but I could see the muscle in his cheek twitching, a sure sign he was nervous. I was just explaining to Jimmy that we have certain financial obligations we have to meet. That doesn't mean we're not using your money for school. What about the science camp 2 years ago? I continued. Laurel gave you $4,000 so Jimmy could go. But he didn't go, did he? Now Toby looked genuinely alarmed. Did you talk to Laurel? Mom, don't listen to her. She's always been jealous of our relationship. She's trying to turn you against me. Answer the question, Toby. My voice was firmer than it had ever been in a conversation with my son. Did Jimmy go to camp or not? No, but that's because circumstances changed at the last minute, Aaron interjected. I had problems with my back, remember? I needed treatment. We couldn't afford both. Interesting, I said, because Laurel told me you were at a spa resort at the time. Was that part of your treatment? Aaron flushed with anger. How dare you? You have no idea what I went through. The doctor recommended spa treatments as part of my therapy. What about Jimmy's physics tutor last year? I turned back to Toby. Lorelai gave you $2,500 for that. But Jimmy told me you refused to pay for a tutor, saying it was too expensive. Toby jumped up from his chair, his face contorted with rage. What are you doing, Mom? Interrogating me? You came to my house to accuse me of something after everything I've done for you? What have you done for me, Toby? I asked, remaining surprisingly calm. Asked me for money under various pretexts? Used my grandson to make me feel guilty? Lied to me for years? That's ridiculous. Toby slammed his fist on the table, causing the cups to jump. You believe Laurel more than your own son? You've always loved her more. You've always put her above me. I shook my head, surprised at how quickly he had gone from denial to accusations against me. It's not about who I love more, Toby. It's about the truth. And the truth is that you used me as an ATM. You asked for money for one thing and spent it on another. You used my grandson as bait, knowing I couldn't say no to him. We didn't use anyone, Erin interjected, standing next to her husband in solidarity. We're just trying to give our son a better future. If you really loved Jimmy, you wouldn't hesitate for a minute. If you really cared about Jimmy's future, I retorted, you wouldn't buy designer handbags when you can't afford to send him to the school of his dreams. Erin froze, her eyes wide with shock. What do you mean? I saw you at the Oak Ridge Mall 2 days ago, I said, looking straight at her. I saw you buying a Louis Vuitton bag, the one that's sitting in your hallway right now. A heavy silence hung in the air. Toby and Erin exchanged panicked glances, clearly not prepared for this turn of events. Have you been following us? Toby finally managed to say, his voice full of indignation. No, I just came shopping and happened to see you, I replied. And I overheard your conversation by the fountain about how you were planning to use my money to pay off your car loan, about how you used Jimmy to pressure me. You were eavesdropping on our private conversation, Erin was furious. How could you? I didn't plan to, I said calmly, but I'm glad I heard it. It opened my eyes to what's been going on for years. Toby suddenly changed tactics. His shoulders slumped, and his face took on a guilty expression. Mom, listen, I know this looks bad, but you don't understand what we're going through. Yes, we have debts. Yes, sometimes we don't spend money as wisely as we should, but we really want Jimmy to go to this school. Then why do you buy expensive things when you can't afford to pay for his education? I asked. It was an anniversary gift, Erin interjected. We can treat ourselves once a year, can't we? A bag, a car, new appliances for the kitchen. I waved my hand around. All of this tells me that you allow yourselves much more than once a year. And yet you ask me for money, claiming it's for Jimmy. Toby started to get angry again. What do you want us to say, Mom? That we're bad parents? That we don't spend money the way you think we should? Yes, maybe. But this is our life, and we have the right to live it the way we want. Of course you do, I agreed, but not at my expense, and not at the expense of Jimmy's future. So that's what this is about, Toby said bitterly. You think you know what's best for my son? You think you can tell us how to raise him? No, Toby, I shook my head. I just don't want to be part of your lies anymore. I'm not giving you the $7,000. Erin gasped. You're refusing to help your grandson? How can you be so heartless? I'm not refusing to help Jimmy, I clarified. I'm refusing to give you the money. There's a difference. What are you talking about? Toby frowned. I'm willing to pay for Jimmy's school directly, I said. I'll contact the Brightwood administration and make a deposit in my name. That way, I'll be sure the money goes toward Jimmy's education and not your debts or new purchases. Toby and Erin exchanged panicked glances. Their plan was falling apart before their eyes. That's insulting, Toby finally said. You don't trust us with our own son's education? After everything I've learned, no, I don't, I replied honestly. Toby moved closer, looming over me, his voice threateningly quiet. You can't do this to us, Mom. You can't interfere in our family. Jimmy is our son, and we decide what's best for him. I didn't back down. And I'm his grandmother, and I have a right to care about his future too. Especially when I see that you're putting your desires above his needs. Get out of my house, Toby hissed through clenched teeth. Now. I had never seen such rage on my son's face. He looked like a stranger, someone I didn't know at all. And maybe that was the case. Maybe I never really knew my son, seeing only what I wanted to see. All right, I'll go, I said, standing up. But my offer still stands. I'm willing to pay for Jimmy's school directly. If you really care about his future, you'll accept it. We don't need your charity, Aaron shouted. And we don't need your control. We can take care of ourselves. I headed for the door but stopped when I heard a noise on the stairs. Jimmy was standing on the bottom step, his face pale and shaken. It was obvious that he had heard at least part of our conversation. Jimmy, Aaron was the first to notice him. Have you been standing there long? Long enough, he replied quietly, his gaze shifting from my parents to me and back again. Grandma, is it true? Did you offer to pay Brightwood directly? Yes, dear, I nodded. I want you to get the education you've always dreamed of. And you, he turned to his parents, his voice trembling with emotion. Were you going to use this money for something else? Like the camp? Toby paled. Jimmy, you don't understand. It's complicated. We have financial obligations. I understand enough, Jimmy interrupted him. I had never seen my usually soft and yielding grandson so firm. You lied, to Grandma, to me, to everyone. James Lattimore. Aaron used his full name, which always meant trouble. Go to your room immediately. This is a conversation between adults, and it has nothing to do with you. It concerns me when it's about my future, Jimmy retorted, stepping off the last step and approaching me. Grandma, I want to go with you. Toby stepped between us. You're not going anywhere. You're a minor and I'm your father. You're staying home. Jimmy didn't back down. Then I want Grandma to stay. I want to hear the truth, the whole truth. I could see Toby struggling with the urge to just kick me out and forbid Jimmy from having this conversation. But he also knew that such behavior would only confirm his son's suspicions. All right, he finally said, backing down. Let's go back to the kitchen and talk, like civilized people. We returned to the table. Jimmy sat down next to me, demonstratively distancing himself from his parents. Erin looked as if she were about to cry from humiliation and anger. Jimmy, Toby began in a calmer tone, you have to understand that adult life is complicated. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions, balancing different needs and obligations. Like between my education and Mom's designer bag? Jimmy asked with unexpected directness. Erin flinched as if she had been struck. That's not fair. It was a gift, a special occasion. And my school isn't a special occasion? Jimmy turned to her. You're always talking about how important education is, how you want the best future for me. But when it comes down to it, it turns out that a new car, a new bag, and new gadgets are more important. You don't understand how much we sacrifice for you, Erin exclaimed. We work from morning to night to give you a decent life. Then why can't you pay for my school? Jimmy asked. Why do I have to ask Grandma? Toby and Erin fell silent, clearly unprepared for such a direct question from their son. Because we have other expenses, Toby finally said. The mortgage, the car, insurance, utilities, and designer bags, Jimmy added. And new gadgets, and vacations you take without me, leaving me with my friends. I could see Toby struggling with his growing anger. He wasn't used to his son talking to him like that, asking questions like that. That's enough, he finally said. You're crossing the line, Jimmy. We're your parents, and we don't have to report every purchase we make to you. But you have to be honest, Jimmy retorted. Especially when you're using me to get money from Grandma. Erin couldn't take it anymore. We weren't using anyone. We just wanted help from our family. What's wrong with that? What's wrong is how you did it, Jimmy replied, and I was struck by his maturity. You lied. You pretended you needed the money for one thing, but you planned to spend it on something else. And this isn't the first time you've done this. Toby slammed his fist on the table. Enough! I won't let you talk to us like that. Go to your room now. Jimmy didn't move. No, I want to know the truth. I want to know if you were really going to send me to Brightwood, or if it was just a way to get money from Grandma. Toby and Erin exchanged glances, and in that moment, I saw something break between them and their son. Trust that can be destroyed in an instant but takes years to rebuild, if it can be rebuilt at all. Of course we wanted to send you to that school, Erin said, but her voice sounded unconvincing even to herself. It's just, We have other commitments we have to fulfill. Like the car, Jimmy added. The car you were going to pay for with Grandma's money. Toby jumped up from his chair, his face contorted with rage. It's all her! He pointed at me. She's turning you against us. She's always wanted to control our family, always sticking her nose where it doesn't belong. That's not true. I shook my head. I just want you to be honest. With Jimmy, with me, with yourselves. Get out of my house, Toby shouted. And don't you ever come near my son again. Jimmy stood next to me. If Grandma leaves, I'm leaving with her. Erin burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. See what you've done? She cried through her tears. You've destroyed our family. You've turned our son against us. No, Mom, Jimmy said quietly. You did that yourselves, with your lies. When I returned home after that terrible scene at Toby's house, I felt devastated. The emotional strain of the last few days had drained all my strength. I sank into the chair by the window, the one Harold used to love to sit in, and looked out at my garden. The hydrangeas my husband had cared for so much were beginning to form buds. Everything has its cycle, Eunice, he used to say. The important thing is to stay true to yourself. Today, I had finally done just that. I had stayed true to myself despite all the manipulation and emotional pressure. But why did it feel like a defeat rather than a victory? Jimmy wanted to leave with me, but I couldn't let that happen. No matter how disappointed he was in his parents, I had no right to break up their family. I just left him my phone number and told him he could always come to me if he needed a safe place to stay. As I left, I saw a mixture of anger and fear in Toby's eyes. Fear of losing control of the situation, of his son, of the familiar routine in which I was a reliable source of financial support for him. Erin continued to cry, switching between accusations against me and attempts to emotionally manipulate Jimmy. The phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. Laurel. Mom, how did it go? Her voice sounded worried. Worse than I expected, I replied honestly. Toby is furious. Erin is in tears, and Jimmy... I paused, searching for the right words. Jimmy overheard our conversation, and now he knows the truth. He's very upset. Oh my God, Lorelei sighed. Poor child. Toby called me 10 minutes ago, screaming into the phone, accusing me of turning you against him. Thanks, Laurel, I said, feeling grateful for her support. I don't regret talking to them, but it hurts to see how it's affected Jimmy. Are you still planning to help Jimmy with that school? Laurel asked. Yes, of course, I replied without hesitation. He shouldn't have to suffer because of his parents' behavior. Tomorrow I'll call Brightwood and find out about the admission and payment procedures. That's a good idea, Laurel agreed. But Toby might see it as more interference in his family's business. Let him see it however he wants, I said with sudden determination. I won't let his feelings dictate my actions anymore. I've let him manipulate me for too long. That evening, as I was preparing a simple dinner, the doorbell rang. Jimmy stood on the doorstep with a backpack slung over his shoulder and a determined look on his face. Jimmy! I couldn't hide my surprise. What are you doing here? Do your parents know you're here? I left a note, he replied, entering the house. I couldn't stay there anymore, Grandma. They were yelling at each other all the time, then at me. Dad said horrible things about you, and Mom cried and said you ruined our family. I hugged him, feeling his shoulders shake. Oh, Jimmy, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. It's not your fault, he said, pulling away and looking me in the eyes. I know they lied. Not just to you, but to me too. All these years they've been using me to get money from you and then spending it on their own things. I called Toby, bracing myself for another wave of anger and accusations. Where is he? Toby asked without greeting me, his voice tense with restrained rage. He's with me, I replied calmly. He's fine, he's had dinner and is resting now. I'm coming to get him right now, Toby said. No, I surprised myself with the firmness of my voice. Not today, Toby. Jimmy needs time to calm down and think, and so do you. You have no right to keep my son, he shouted. I'm calling the police. I handed the phone to Jimmy, who had been listening to the entire conversation. He took the phone reluctantly. Dad? Yes, I'm at Grandma's. No, I came here on my own. She didn't lure me here. I can't come back right now. I need some time. No, I'm not taking her side. I just want everyone to be honest. If you call the police, I'll tell them I left voluntarily and that I don't feel safe at home because of your shouting. Okay, I'll call you tomorrow. He handed me back my phone, his face pale but determined. He said he's giving me until tomorrow to come to my senses, and then he'll come for me. And that I'm a traitor for choosing you over my family. The next morning, Toby arrived as promised. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, his face gaunt. He was alone without Aaron. I'm taking Jimmy, he said instead of a greeting. He's packing his things, I replied, letting him into the house. Toby, we need to talk. About what? He asked coldly. About how you destroyed my family? How you turned my son against me? I didn't destroy anything, Toby, I said calmly. I just stopped being your personal ATM. And you turned Jimmy against you with your behavior, your lies, your manipulation. Don't you dare tell me how to raise my son, he snapped. You have no idea what we're going through. I know you spend money on luxuries you can't afford, and then you ask me for money for Jimmy's needs, which are never satisfied, I countered. I know you've been lying to me, Laurel, and Jimmy himself for years, and I know it has to stop. What do you want? He asked through clenched teeth. I'm going to pay for Brightwood for Jimmy, I said, directly without any money going to you, and I'm going to open an education fund in his name for college. This is not up for discussion. You have no right to interfere? I do, I interrupted. As Jimmy's grandmother, I have a right to look out for his future, especially when I see his parents putting their desires ahead of his needs. That's insulting, Toby hissed. Are you implying that we're bad parents? I'm not implying anything, Toby. I'm stating it clearly. You may be good parents in many ways, but when it comes to prioritizing and being honest, you have serious issues. Jimmy came down the stairs with his backpack in his hands. He looked calmer than yesterday, but still tense. I'm ready, Dad, he said quietly. Toby nodded without looking at his son. Get in the car. I'll be right there. When Jimmy left, Toby turned to me. This isn't over, Mom. You can't just come in here and tell us how to live our lives. I'm not dictating, I replied. I'm just setting boundaries. And if you want us to have any kind of relationship, you're going to have to respect them. What relationship? Toby sneered bitterly. You've made it clear that you think I'm a liar and a manipulator. I made it clear that I won't tolerate any more lies and manipulation, I corrected him. That I won't finance your lifestyle at the expense of my grandson's future. He shook his head. You've always been so righteous. You always thought you knew best. I still love you, no matter what, I called after him. But I won't let you use that love against me or against Jimmy anymore. He paused for a moment as if he wanted to say something, but then he left silently, slamming the door behind him. I watched them drive away, Toby behind the wheel, Jimmy in the passenger seat, both silent and tense. My heart was breaking, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of relief. A week later, I received a letter from a lawyer. Toby and Aaron were officially forbidding me from contacting Jimmy without their permission and threatening legal action if I attempted to interfere in their family affairs by paying for school or opening a bank account for Jimmy. I was shocked by this move. It was one thing to be angry with me, but it was another to use legal means to sever my relationship with my grandson. Laurel was just as outraged. That's ridiculous, she exclaimed. They can't forbid you from seeing your grandson, and they certainly can't stop you from spending your money the way you want to. Whether they can or not, they're trying, I said wearily. And I don't want to drag Jimmy into a legal battle. He's going through enough as it is. Laurel gave me the contact information for a lawyer who specialized in family law, but I wasn't sure I wanted to go down that road. Maybe confronting Toby and Aaron directly would only make things worse. Jimmy called me secretly from school. Grandma, did you get a letter from their lawyer? Yes, sweetie, I replied, surprised that he knew about it. I saw a draft on Dad's computer, he explained. I'm so angry at them. They have no right to keep me from seeing you. Jimmy, I said cautiously, I don't want you to fight with your parents over me. It will only make things worse. But it's not fair, he exclaimed. They're using me as a weapon against you just because you didn't give them money. In the end, I decided to act quietly but decisively. I set up a trust fund in Jimmy's name that he could use for his education when he turned 18. I couldn't help him with Brightwood now, but I could secure his future in college. I also started collecting documentation of all the times Toby had asked me for money for Jimmy, but used it for other purposes. Not to use it against him in court, but rather as proof to myself that I was doing the right thing by setting boundaries. Laurel supported me in every way she could. She visited me regularly, called me, and even arranged for me to meet with a support group for grandparents facing similar problems. Our relationship, which had always been more respectful than close, now became truly warm, based on mutual support and understanding. Jimmy continued to call me in secret, telling me about his life, school, and how things were going at home. According to him, Toby and Aaron were gradually changing their lifestyle. Less expensive purchases, more talk about budgeting and saving. But our relationship with Toby remained broken. He didn't call, didn't visit, didn't even send his regards through Jimmy. Aaron, according to Jimmy, had forbidden anyone to mention my name in their house. It hurt, but I understood that some bridges cannot be rebuilt, especially when they have been destroyed by years of lies and manipulation. Sometimes, while working in the garden, I still talked to Harold as if he could hear me. "I lost a son, Harold," I would say, trimming the roses. But maybe that's the price I had to pay to stay true to myself, to protect Jimmy from the same pattern of manipulation and lies. And although the only answer I got was the rustling of leaves in the wind, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had done what I had to do, set boundaries, protected myself and my values, helped my grandson see the truth, however unpleasant it was. It was a bitter victory, but a victory nonetheless. And I knew that Harold, wherever he was now, would have approved of my choice.